There are people everywhere. The snow is falling white and pretty as I stroll on my way to you. How would you feel?
Hello everybody, welcome back to Vlogmas. I think we're on day 13. Bananas. We're just over halfway, which is a fun time for us to do something a little bit different. So for today's vlog, instead of a day in the life, we're just gonna have a little sit down chat about some things that I read this year that I think you might like. Maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't. I'm wearing my pajamas because it's Sunday and I love myself. So get in your pajamas if you want to. Watch the video in a cozy way. Why not? So at the beginning of 2021, one of my major goals was to read through this bookshelf. In 2020, my goal was just to read one book a month. I wanted to read 12 books. And when I made that goal, how I did that and how I was able to accomplish that goal and like surpass that goal was that I thought about what are the things that are hindering me from doing that now. So it was things like I would be on my phone when I was home. Maybe I would watch YouTube or something along those lines instead of reading. And I also needed to know why this mattered to me. Reading is really important to me because it helps me to think creatively. It helps me to more deeply rest instead of just kind of numb out. And it's a way for me to feel like I am keeping myself in a calm state, but also doing something that feeds my mind. I'm very productivity oriented and it feels like a productive form of rest for me. I was able to do that goal in 2020 well past what I thought I was able to do because I thought through those things. And then this year I was like, I really want to make sure that every book I have on this shelf is one that I have read. And in order to do that, I made a new goal. So my new goal for this year was that every book on this shelf that belonged to me, not to my husband, I agreed to read. I read from the top to the bottom, and if I didn't want to finish it, which was not required, but if I didn't want to finish it and it was my book, I donated it. So we have a ton of little libraries around here, so I would just go take it to a little library and donate it for someone who might enjoy it instead of it just sitting on my shelf, taking up space, looking pretty but not being actually read. I read a bunch of my husband's books. I read a bunch of books that people had gifted me that I hadn't quite cracked open yet. And I didn't buy a single book this year. I bought my first book last week when we were in Portland, and that was really exciting because I felt like I did it when I had really run out of things that I could read. It wasn't like, oh, I do have all of these books on my shelf that I could read, but instead I'm just gonna buy a new book. It was like, no, I have exhausted my at-home library and now I'm gonna buy a new book and start contributing back to that library. So what I wanted to do with you today is share the 5-star books that I read this year. Out of the 67 books that I read this year, I wanted to share the ones that really just blew me away. Some of these I gave a 5-star because the writing was so good. Some I gave a 5-star because the process of reading it was so enjoyable and I got swept away. Others I gave 5 stars just because they impacted my life in some significant way. So let's get into them. I'll tell you what I liked, tell you a little bit about the book, and you can tell me below if you've read any of these. If you have any book recommendations, I would love to hear them. So book number 1 is the only book that I had an audiobook for that I listened to. That sounds like I cheated, but here's the thing. I have an Audible account. I have like 10 credit hours on there because I just haven't used them. And so I went on a road trip and I listened to this one on that trip, and I don't feel like that was cheating because it was technically free. But the book was Daisy Jones and the Six, and it was so good. It felt almost like a true story about a band, how the band formed, how the band became successful, the interpersonal relationships in the band. It was like the marriages were really inspiring in some ways and really sad in other ways. It was really about the interpersonal relationships of a band. And one of my favorite bands is Fleetwood Mac, and it kind of maybe loosely based on Fleetwood Mac, and so that was really fun for me. It was definitely a get carried away in a story kind of book. I loved listening to it as an audiobook, and it's a high recommendation for me if you love kind of memoir style stories, but also any kind of realistic fiction. that's more kind of about the interpersonal dynamics than it is about like anything crazy happening. Definitely recommend. And now we're going to get into the physical books that I have. I tried to take a thumbnail photo with all of them in my hands and I literally couldn't hold them all. It was a good reading year for me. So we're going to try and go through them kind of quickly just so that we're not here for the next 3 hours. We're starting with Winter by Karl Ove Knausgaard. This is his name. This is the first book of his that I've ever read, and quite frankly, it's thrilling in the most simplistic way. It's basically just him sitting down and writing about a topic, specifically around winter. Every single day, he just kind of sat down and wrote. And he wrote these like beautiful essays that you would think, you know, it starts out being about something like tea and it ends up being about like neuroscience. Like it just like runs the gamut of ideas and thought, and it's so beautifully written. It meditates on simple things, so it makes you really appreciate life more. I just loved it. I also read My Struggle Part 1 this year as well. It didn't make the top 5 list just because it's so much. Like, it's his memoir, but it's so detailed and such little happens that it's great. Like, it's incredible if you have the time. I highly recommend it. I just kind of felt like I can't invest any more time into this. Like, I read it. I'm glad I read part 1. I am not going to read part 2. But this is, his writing style is so like detailed and intricate and specific and descriptive that it really works in short essay form for me. But in like a terms of a long novel, I got a little bit antsy. But highly recommend this one. The next is kind of a part of a series, and I'm both of them together, Recursion and Dark Matter by Blake Crouch. Both of these are so fun. They were like time-space continuum type books about time travel and other dimensions, and it was just so fun, so riveting, fast-paced. Both of them just completely carried me away. I got really invested in the characters, but also the storyline, and it made me feel like I was learning about other dimensions, which, you know, I wasn't, but it was really fun for a minute to get swept up into that world. The next book was No Cure for Being a Human. This was sent to me actually by Kate Bowler for her launch. She's able to make everything really relatable, even though it's something that I absolutely couldn't relate to. So she talks a lot about her journey with cancer, a cancer diagnosis, and just kind of her internal process. She writes about it in such a way that makes it feel so human, which is interesting, and just reminds you of how okay it is to exist and how okay it is to exist in whatever form you happen to be in. Just an absolutely stunning read. Highly recommend, especially if you struggle with a little bit of perfectionism or image consciousness. Grab her up. These are not in any specific order, by the way. I thought I was going to do them in categories, but it's not happening. The next one was Neil Gaiman's Neverwhere. I wish that I had read this around Halloween because it was so spooky and creepy and dark. I've loved everything I've ever read of his. I haven't read a ton, but this and then Ocean at the End of the Lane is one of my other favorite books I read in the past of his. Just completely swept me up. I wish there was a movie of it because it was like one of those books where everything felt so real and you felt so invested, and then it's like you knew the world and you knew the characters and you were part of it, so you want to see it come to life, you know what I mean? And I know that they made a TV show about it in like the 90s. I'm pretty sure it was like back in the 90s. So maybe I'll try and watch that, but I've heard it didn't quite do it justice. But I would like to see a movie of this because it was just so good. So if you're looking for a little bit of like a spooky, otherworldly read where you can get swept away, where it's like just odd and strange and eerie, definitely check out Neverwhere. This is 5 Gears. It's all about like work-life balance. I was sent this by lovely ladies of Salt and Pepper podcast. I was on their podcast. They sent me this book as a gift and some scrunchies, which I use like every day. And it did impact me significantly. So that's why it's on the list. Let's talk about it. So essentially the idea is that you have 5 gears. So 5th gear is like in the zone, like deep work. 4th gear is like task-oriented work. 3rd gear is socializing. 2nd gear is connecting deeply. And 1st gear is learning to recharge. And the theory is make sure you're in the right gear at the right time. And the big takeaway for me, and I think the reason that I gave this a 5 is because it showed me that I was loving my people through like a 4th gear mindset, like task oriented. Like I'll make sure you have everything that you need. I'll make sure that the house is running smoothly. I'll be the timekeeper. I'll make sure that like everything is taken care of. The house is clean. We always have like groceries in the fridge. You always have the snacks that you want or need or whatever like that. Instead of actually spending one-on-one time with them and connecting with them on that like deep level gear 2 level, I was meeting them always at gear 4, and I was often always in gear 4 or 5, task oriented or deep work. Like I kind of lived in those spaces and really struggled with the 3, 2, and 1, socialization and deep connection and rest. So it helped me to kind of think about it like that for a while and really helped me to find some balance. Next, All About Love by Bell Hooks. My biggest takeaway from this book, it's all about love. I highlighted this one a ton, I remember. The biggest takeaway for me in this is that love isn't a feeling, love is what we do. And so just because we feel connected to someone, just because we feel connected to something doesn't mean that it's loving us. And so oftentimes what we call love is actually abuse or harmful behavior, because we're like, but they love me. It's like, no, people who love you don't do those things to you. People who love you don't lie to you. That is not love. Love is the action of love. Right? Oh, here it is. Love, this is what I was trying to describe to you. Love is as love does. Love is an act of Southern accent. Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and an action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love, we choose to love. When we feel deeply drawn to someone, we connect with them. That is, we invest feelings or emotion in them. That process of investment, wherein a loved one becomes important to us, is called cathexis. We all know how often individuals feel connected to someone through the process of connecting, insist that they love the other person, even if they are hurting or neglecting them. When we understand love as the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth, I'm going to say that again. When we understand love as the will to nurture our own and another's spiritual growth, it becomes clear that we cannot claim to love if we are hurtful and abusive. Love and abuse cannot coexist. Abuse and neglect are, by definition, the opposites of nurturance and care. Okay, All About Love by Bell Hooks. Next, this is the first 5-star I gave this year, is Dear Life by Alice Munro. This was sent to me. I did like a book exchange thing on Facebook like 5 or 6 years ago, where we just kind of sent people random books and you ended up getting like 6 or 7 books or something like that. So I did that. Someone sent me this book in that, and it immediately swept me away. First of all, I love short stories. I love short story style memoirs. I just love short essays. It's my favorite kind of writing to read. And this was all just tons and tons and tons of short stories, realistic fiction about just kind of being a feminist and wrestling with a male-dominated society. Absolutely stunning. Highly, highly recommend. Our Steinbecks together. So Steinbeck number 1 that I read this year was Journal of a Novel, The East of Eden Letters. This was my introduction to Steinbeck. I had never read any Steinbeck before. I had honestly avoided him. I had kind of grouped him together with like Hemingway and kind of like this like hyper masculine ideal. And so it really I wasn't very drawn to Steinbeck. I hadn't really had any interest, but Obi had both of these books on our shelf. And so I took a gander, grabbed them up and read it. I love reading books that writers write about writing, one of my other favorite genres. And this is Steinbeck's daily journal. He wrote every single day about writing his book, East of Eden. He wrote to a friend every single day that he wrote about writing it. Incredible. absolutely incredible. And in it, I really fell in love with Steinbeck. I was like, oh, you and me, like, I'm pretty sure we're the same human. Like, whatever, like, character types, like Enneagram, Myers-Briggs, whatever Steinbeck is, he and I are the same. Like, whatever it is, we are the same. The way he feels about work, the way he feels about living is all right. I'm right there with him. So absolutely loved this. Swept me away. I probably will read it again and again and again. The next one is Travels with Charlie, which is his other nonfiction book that he wrote. This is about a trip that he did in a truck or an RV, kind of like a camper van situation with his dog Charlie. And it just details the whole trip and everything that he did and everything that he felt. I, several years ago, went on a road trip to all 38 continental states and lived in my car. And so it gave me real flashback vibes of just kind of what that was like, but definitely from a different time and different situation because he had like his home on his wheels. But absolutely incredible to read. So fun. I read a couple of other Steinbeck books this year, but I will say these two were my favorite, the nonfictions. Next is Kurt Vonnegut. I always forget if it's Siren of Titan or Sirens of Titan. The Sirens of Titan. This was my first Vonnegut book of my life. I'd always intended to read Vonnegut. I had purchased several Vonnegut books. I just never read them. And it was really, really fun. He's funny, insightful, and kind of, I know he's a humanist, which is kind of how I think of my viewpoint. We definitely align on a lot of things about humans and how to think about people and how to be a person. And all of that comes through in his fiction in a really cool way. So just an absolutely delightful, fun, silly read that makes you actually think about some pretty deep stuff. So loved this one. Okay. This one, I had 2 disappointments this year. I had 4 disappointments this year. So here's the thing. As I've grown and become more aware of myself and the things that feel good to me, the things that feel bad to me, it makes art harder in a way. And as I just become more unapologetically offended, like, quite frankly, like, just kind of like, no, I'm not okay with that. And it's okay that I'm not okay with that. One of those things being, I'll tell you why I'm bringing this up right now. So the lighting might be a little bit different because I filmed the whole video. I got cut off and didn't realize it and filmed the whole video. So now we're doing the front facing camera so that I can see if I'm getting cut off. I hope I can remember what we've done and what we haven't done. Like, I really did film that whole thing. Okay. Let me go back and see what we've done. Okay, so where we were at is I was telling you that I had some letdowns this year. The first letdown I had was with Tom Robbins. I used to love his writing, or one of his books I've read, I loved his writing. And I tried to read several of his books this year, and all of them had like vivid descriptions of pedophilia in them, from like a positive perspective, kind of. It was just unsettling, and I couldn't do it. The second person I was really disappointed with this year was Henry Miller. I used to love him. I tried to read Cities of Clichy this year, and it disgusted me, just like the way he wrote about women. And the third was Murakami. I really wanted to love Murakami. Like, I read this. This is the first thing I read of him. It's a compilation of short stories. Loved every bit of it. There were like a couple of moments that I was like, I didn't really like that description, but I could get past it. And I really just absolutely fell in love with this book and the stories. Yeah, loved After the Quake. But then I tried to read some of his other books, and the way he talks about women, it's like, I was just really disappointed. And I felt like if your first impression of a woman is to describe her like breasts, it's disappointing. and boring, quite frankly, and unsettling for me. So I was really sad about that, but I did like this one. This one got 5 stars from me. The other book that got 5 stars from an author that disappointed me this year is David Sedaris, The Best of Me. Here's the thing with David Sedaris and me. I've read every single thing he's ever written. I took his master class. I think he's an incredible writer. He's been my favorite writer forever. I want to love him so much because his writing is insane, so good, so like beautiful. It makes you feel like you're part of his family. I laugh out loud when I read his stories. The issue is that he's incredibly fat phobic and unapologetically so. He's very anti PC culture, which tells me that you like the energy of I just want to be able to say what I want to say and like don't be offended by it, tells me about a lot about you as a person. So that paired with being super fat phobic in the way that he writes about people sucks. And I understand that his whole shtick is that he's like not a good person. Like he's supposed to be like the bad guy in his stories, and that's what makes him so charming, I think. But I can't get over it. And unfortunately, this is the last book of David Sedaris I'll probably read, although it was great. I will say I had read every single story that's in here before. It's a compilation of his favorite stories of his own. I've read every single book that he's ever written again, but so I've read all of these, but it still felt like I was reading them for the first time. It was just as enjoyable, and damn it, he's a great writer. It is not a disappointment in this way, and that is Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. I've had this book forever. I knew it would be one of my favorite books, but I had avoided it for a long time because I was scared, honestly, that we had too similar of trauma in some ways, and that it would be really triggering for me. But honestly, it wasn't. I mean, she talks so much about like race and her experiences with race that I felt like I was learning more than I felt like I was experiencing something I had experienced before. You know what I mean? So yeah, you can tell I loved it. I marked it all up. I will read you a section I marked for you. In the school itself, I was disappointed to find that I was not the most brilliant or even nearly the most brilliant student. The white kids had better vocabularies than I, and what was more appalling, less fear in the classrooms. They never hesitated to hold up their hands in response to a teacher's question, even when they were wrong. They were wrong aggressively, while I had to be certain about all of my facts before I dared to call attention to myself. I mean, yeah. Good. That's good. Good stuff. This is like, I think, should be required reading, honestly. And maybe it was for a lot of you all in school. I had never read it before. The next one is Lit by Mary Karr. I first read Mary Karr actually last year. I got her Art of a Memoir novel, like book about writing memoirs, and I thought it was so good that I was like, I should get one for memoirs and actually read that. So I grabbed this one. It's so good. It's about kind of alcoholism and becoming sober and parenting and that all of that process, and her kind of life story. Absolutely incredible read. It sweeps you away like a novel, but it's a memoir. Lincoln in the Bardo by George Saunders. This is about George Lincoln's son having passed away, and Abraham Lincoln's son having passed away, and Abraham Lincoln would come and visit his body, and kind of the dynamics of the ghosts in the graveyard. And it's written like it's an eerie story, right? It's a ghost story, but it's funny, but it's also deep and makes you think about life differently and life and death, but it's also really lighthearted. Here's a section from it that I marked. It says, "Strange, isn't it, to have dedicated one's life to a certain venture, neglecting other aspects of one's life, only to have that venture in the end amount to nothing at all. The products of one's labors utterly forgotten." Yeah, really good read, really fun, but also really deep. This one's a little bit of a cheat because I had read it before. This is one of my favorite books, and one of my favorite writers, college and post-college, kind of my Introduction to Radical Feminism, Intersectional Feminism. If you are interested in intersectional feminism or wanting to learn about it, I think this is your textbook, or at least your starting point. It's by Audre Lorde. Who's like a Black feminist, lesbian poet. I think she calls herself a warrior poet, which I love. And it's just she's brilliant, and unfortunately everything that she's written about is still incredibly relevant to us today and important for us to learn. And if you're curious about white feminism versus intersectional feminism, this is a must read. I'll grab you some. I'll read you a bit now. At this point in time, I believe that women carry within themselves the possibility for fusion of these two approaches, so necessary for survival, and we come closest to this combination in our poetry. I speak here of poetry as a revelatory distillation of experience, not the sterile wordplay that too often the white fathers distorted the word poetry to mean, in order to cover a desperate wish for imagination without insight. For women, then, poetry is not a luxury. It is a vital necessity of our existence. It forms the quality of the light within which we predicate our hopes and dreams toward survival and change, first made into language, then into idea, then into more tangible action. Poetry is the way we help give name to the nameless so it can be thought. The farthest horizons of our hopes and fears are cobbled by our poems carved from the rock experiences of our daily lives. Yeah, this is like the one, if you haven't read, and if you like don't read any of the books that I recommend, like this is the one I want you to read. And then this is a compilation of short stories, Pastures of Heaven. This is all different stories written by Steinbeck that surround the same town. Although every story is a standalone, it's like all the same characters in all the same town, if that makes sense. So it's just like a bunch of little things that happened, and it's really like a meditation on ordinary life from that, like this time period, kind of from like the Old West. And yeah, it makes you feel like you're time traveling, and it sweeps you away into this. It makes you feel like you live in this town in the West way back in the day, and like you're part of the neighborhood. Next is You Don't Owe Anyone by Caroline Garnett McGraw. Caroline was actually on my podcast. We talked about this book, but the book hadn't come out yet. She was like pre-ordering it, so I hadn't gotten to read it yet, but I read it after she got on. I want to have her back on to talk about it because it is so good. It's basically like, hey, you get to choose what you do in your life. Like, you don't owe anyone your brave face, your being a good person. You don't owe anyone anything. Like, you get to choose how you show up and what you give them. Their expectations are not your responsibility. I recommend this for anyone, especially female identifying people in our society right now, but or like assigned female at birth. However, if you're an Enneagram 1 and Enneagram 2 specifically, definitely grab this up. But honestly, I mean, 3s could really use this, 9s could really use this. So I don't even have to Enneagram about it. I think it's really good if you're struggling with people pleasing or finding your role or wanting to make sure that you live up to the expectations that others have for you. You should read this book. Final one, last but absolutely not least, is Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed. This is a compilation of her Dear Sugar letters. I was blown away by this book. I'm not joking. I think she's an epic writer. Like this, it's absolutely mind-blowing. Like I listened to her podcast. I had heard about her, but I hadn't really read any Dear Sugar letters before, and I didn't know how just absolutely epic they were. Like she's pulling together like these people's very specific situations and making them universal by the way that she like pulls ideas and reflections in, and not only like gives them like compassionate, loving advice, but also makes them relevant to all of us. It's insane. Like she's an absolute genius. I think she's an absolute genius. Like what she's doing is unhuman. Like it's like so good. She's so talented. I really feel like she's underrated. Like I know she's famous, right? And like we've made movies about her, life, but like, she's like, I mean, I think she's like one of the world's greatest writers. Like, I don't know. I was like blown away. I was like, she's a literal genius. I don't know how she does what she does. Yeah, she's brilliant. So those are my books, y'all. Those are the 5-star reviews of the year. I hope that you stayed with me to this long. If you have, and you're not tired of hearing me talk yet, let's go pull a card, check out our advent calendar for today, see what we got, and then we'll close the vlog from there. If you did make it this far, I see you, I appreciate you. Drop me a book recommendation for 2022 if you have one. All of us, I think, would appreciate it in the comments below, and I'll check it out. And yeah, let's go pull a card, check the advent calendar, and yeah, I'll see you in the other room. Ooh, another eye cream, and I know I like this because I've used this moisturizer before, so I'm excited about that. See what it looks like. Oh, it's another gel. What is it with the gel eye creams? Do you guys know why I'm supposed to like that? So since we're doing books today, we're going to do the Literary Witches Oracle deck. Wings. All right, let's see. The only thing I don't like about this deck, which I love this deck very much, it's so stunning, they just don't have like very strong descriptions, so you kind of have to like, sometimes I like the books that are like, kind of like the descriptions are kind of poetic in themselves, and so I can like pull one sentence out of that and like expand on it in my journaling, but this one's very, very simple, so we have to really think for ourselves. So we got Wings, and Wings is wishes, ambition, and wondering with a W-A-N-D-E-R-I-N-G. So wishes, ambition, and wondering. Well, I think for me, honestly, this reminds me a lot of Travels with Charlie, you know, Steinbeck's journey with his dog and his adventure, and just my own kind of predisposition to want to wonder and write about it and express that. A lot of what I am hoping to do in my life is to travel and write, talk about being human in that process. So my ambition is to wonder and to write. So I think that's what that brings up to me. My ambition and my wish are those. So that's what that brings up for me. Scary to say stuff like that out loud, you know? But what about you? What does that bring up for you? Wishes, ambition, and wondering. Wings. What does that mean to you? And friends, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I know it was a little bit different than a typical day in the life vlog. Honestly, we haven't done very much over here, so you didn't really miss a day in the life. I really just read all day. I've been reading A Court of Thorn and Roses, and that's been it. Drinking coffee and reading, and that's been a really, really, really good rest day for me. So I hope you enjoyed today's vlog, and I will see you tomorrow for the next one.